The foundation for regenerative agriculture is understanding the carbon cycle. All living things require carbon in order to survive. There is an abundance of carbon in the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, but that form of carbon is not accessible by anything other than plants. Everything else requires plants to convert carbon into a form that they can use. Plants access the carbon from the atmosphere during the process of photosynthesis, and convert the carbon dioxide into glucose. Water and sunlight are also required for photosynthesis to occur. After the plant has converted carbon dioxide into glucose, many different things can happen. The plant needs carbon to build cell walls and create their physical structure. The plant also needs to access the glucose so it can convert it to energy. This happens through a different process called respiration. During respiration, the plant brings oxygen in through their stomata and breaks the glucose molecule down. As a result, the plant releases water and carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere and ATP is formed. ATP is what becomes energy. Not all of the glucose goes towards building the physical structure of the plant, or being converted into energy. The plant also releases a significant amount of glucose into the soil through their roots through root exudates. The root exudates provide a food source for beneficial bacteria and fungi, and also contributes to the formation of stable soil aggregates which lead to better soil structure. When the glucose is consumed by the beneficial bacteria and fungi in the soil, they convert it into energy through respiration as well, meaning the carbon is returned to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide during this process. Just like plants, the beneficial bacteria and fungi also need access to oxygen in order for respiration to take place. Soil respiration rate is a great indicator of overall soil health. It is a measure of how actively the microorganisms in the soil are converting glucose back into carbon dioxide. None of this would take place if the plants were not first converting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into glucose through photosynthesis, so plants are the catalyst for the entire carbon cycle. The carbon cycle should also be taken into consideration when evaluating all pest and disease pressure. Weeds are unique from the other pests we will discuss because they are plants, therefore they can photosynthesize. This means they have access to plenty of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. However, weeds can still impact the crop in regards to the carbon cycle. As previously mentioned, carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight are all required for photosynthesis to take place. If the weeds compete with the cash crop for water or sunlight, it will impact the crop's ability to photosynthesize, and this will lead to crop loss. Weeds can also compete with the crop for other resources, but our focus right now is carbon. Now let's take a look at the other pests and diseases that impact our crop. The major problems that can impact a crop like potatoes include pest insects, foliar disease, soil-borne pathogens, and parasitic nematodes. All of these have two major similarities. They all need carbon in order to survive, but none of them can photosynthesize, so they all must access their carbon from a source other than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The reason they all become problematic is because they are going to try and acquire this carbon from the photosynthesizing crop. The soil-borne pathogens that impact crops like potatoes are either going to be bacteria or fungi. This causes great confusion because there is so much talk about beneficial bacteria and fungi that live in the soil. So why are some harmful and some helpful? Let's evaluate what's similar, and what's different about beneficial and pathogenic bacteria and fungi. First, the similarities. They all need carbon to survive, but none of them can photosynthesize. Therefore they need some other source of carbon other than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Another similarity is going to be where get their carbon from. They are all going to rely on the crop to provide this resource, but how they gain access to the carbon is what separates them. What makes certain bacteria and fungi pathogenic is how they gain access to carbon from the crop. In order for them to get carbon, in the form of glucose from the plant, they must destroy cell walls and penetrate the plant. This causes damage to the plant, therefore making them harmful. Beneficial bacteria and fungi, on the other hand, rely on root exudates. This form of carbon is readily available to the beneficial bacteria and fungi and does not require them to do any damage to the plant. In fact, most of these beneficial bacteria and fungi offer something in exchange for the carbon. They might help fight off disease, or increase the availability of certain nutrients in the soil. Root exudates are also the greatest contributing factor when it comes to building the stable carbon portion of the soil known as organic matter. Biological activity, Root exudates and organic matter all contribute to improved soil structure. Improving soil structure and aggregate stability are at the core of regenerative agriculture. Without these, the soil will never meet its full potential, and it all starts with carbon cycling. There are other inputs that can also contribute to a healthy soil, such as compost, fish fertilizer, cover crops, companion crops, and manure. The thing to keep in mind is that none of these would exist without photosynthesis and respiration, but we do not need to solely rely on the crop to do all the work. Crops can benefit from photosynthesis that took place at a different time or location, but anytime we can increase carbon cycling, it will benefit the entire regenerative system. Insects can be divided into many different categories, but the two we are going to focus on are pest and beneficial. Once again, it all comes down to how they gain access to carbon. Insects can't photosynthesize, so they need some kind of carbon source to survive. The reason pest insects are a problem is because they do damage to the crop and attempt to consume the glucose that the plant generated. Some pests might have biting and chewing mouthparts that can quickly desiccate a potato field, like the dreaded Colorado potato beetle, or they might have sap-sucking stylets like aphid. Even though the physical damage done by aphid is minimal, they can spread virus throughout a potato crop during their feeding process, and this is the real threat of aphid, especially to a seed potato producer. Regardless, it's the aphid's need for a carbon source that leads to this problem. There are many more species of beneficial insects than there are pest insects, but no matter which category they fall under, they all need a carbon source. Beneficial insects are known for feeding on pest insects like aphid, or they might parasitize the aphid like wasps do, but that still doesn't satisfy their demand for carbon. Beneficial insects don't damage the crop in order to consume glucose, so where's their carbon going to come from? In the case of a monoculture field of potatoes, there really is no source of carbon for the beneficial insects. What they need is flowering plants to provide them with a carbon resource. This can come in the form of pollen, nectar, or extrafloral nectar. If none of these exist in the field, the beneficial insects will have to travel a great distance for this resource, making them relatively ineffective at consuming or parasitizing pest insects. What we need to do is integrate flowering plants near or in the fields to ensure an abundant source of carbon for these beneficial insects that help manage pest insects for us. Beneficial insects are not the only way to biologically control aphid in a potato field. There are species of fungi that have been identified that are toxic to aphid, but have no negative effect on potatoes. There are also many species of bacteria and fungi that thrive on potato plants that have the ability to outcompete foliar pathogens. Once again, the carbon cycle must be recognized. A limiting resource for these beneficial bacteria and fungi would be their carbon source. The potato plant doesn't do a great job of providing carbon through its foliage, so adding a foliar carbon source will help these species of bacteria and fungi perform. This is where products like compost tea might play a role. Just remember that these products are the result of photosynthesis that took place at a different time and location than the crop. It's a way for us to outsource photosynthesis. In addition to managing pests, beneficial bacteria and fungi contribute greatly to nutrient availability in the soil. Many species are required to digest organic forms of fertility in the soil before the plant can uptake the nutrients. I emphasize the term organic form here, because that simply means it has carbon associated with it. This provides the energy source for the bacteria and fungi that are digesting the material. Some examples might include compost, plant residue, and manure. There are specific examples of bacteria that, when provided with the appropriate host plant, can take nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it to a form that is available to plants. There are also species of mycorrhizal fungi that can extract phosphorus from inert soil and make it available to plants. Carbon, once again, plays a role here. The host plant will provide both of these with carbon in exchange for the nutrient they are providing. In the case of nitrogen-fixing bacteria, the host plant is very important. A crop like potatoes is not an appropriate host, so this is where incorporating legume companion plants can greatly improve this scenario. Now we have identified 3 different pests that can be mitigated by beneficial bacteria and fungi. The last pest that we have not talked about yet, parasitic nematodes, are no different. There are many species beneficial bacteria and fungi that can thrive in a healthy soil that can do a great job of trapping and killing parasitic nematodes. Here is a short clip from the movie Life in the Soil, which shows one specific species of nematode trapping fungi in action.
This fungi prepared a trap with its own body. A nematode's got caught in it. Now the fungus eats it up. Bacteria also feed on a dead nematode.
Now that we have shown how a regenerative system functions, it is good to evaluate how devastating common agricultural practices can be. Monocultures dominate the agricultural landscape, but that is the best way to ensure low carbon cycling. Removing flowering plants from a crop may seem like a simple change, but it can have a devastating effect on beneficial insect populations. Reducing plant diversity will reduce insect diversity, and this will lead to greater opportunities for pest insects to dominate. Synthetic fertilizers are another great way to destroy a regenerative system. Synthetic fertilizers completely bypass the carbon cycle. If carbon cycling is being reduced, then the system is going to be lacking energy. Keeping carbon in motion is what generates the energy that keeps a regenerative system functional. When the carbon cycle is not active, the beneficial bacteria and fungi that we talked about will be lacking the carbon source they need in order to thrive, so their populations will be reduced as a result. The other thing that gets overlooked is how destructive synthetic fertilizers are to soil structure, and once we start to lose soil structure, the foundation crumbles and the entire system starts to fail. One of the most obvious changes that comes with diminished soil structure is a lower water infiltration rate, and a lower water holding capacity. This makes the soil's relationship with water much less efficient. A big reason for this change is a reduction in pore space. Not only does this impact water, but it also reduces gas exchange. This will lead to an anaerobic condition in the soil, which is ideal for so many soil-borne pathogens to thrive. Once conditions in the soil are ideal for pathogens, the temptation to use toxic chemicals like fungicides and soil fumigants will become too great to resist, and then there will be even fewer beneficial bacteria and fungi left to help us out. As the system further degenerates, additional chemicals are going to become a necessity rather than a choice. Toxic inputs like nematicides, insecticides, and herbicides are going to be needed to keep the dysfunctional system productive. There are many layers to why a regenerative systems is beneficial. By taking care of the soil, we can reduce the cost of production, while maintaining yields, and improving the quality of the potatoes. Emphasizing carbon cycling, improving plant and insect diversity, reducing or eliminating synthetic fertilizers and toxic inputs are all essential if we want to improve our soil while raising a potato crop in rotation. There are so many tools available to us such as cover crops, companion crops, and livestock grazing that all work towards a similar goal of regenerative agriculture. Rocky Farms continues to be the premier leader in regenerative potatoes. We look forward to helping others that have a desire to follow a similar path.